For 12 years, Graham Vale believed his mother had disappeared into the kind of loneliness people in mountain towns stopped talking about. No one in Black Laurel had seen Nadine Vale at church, at the pharmacy, or even sitting on the porch of the house she had lived in for decades. But when Graham returned from Arizona and followed a rusted survey marker deep into the woods, he found a steel door bolted into a limestone hillside. Behind that sealed cave, his 74-year-old mother was living underground beside rows of pale vegetables, stacks of court papers, and secrets someone had worked very hard to bury. When she saw him standing there, she didn't smile. She didn't call his name. She simply whispered, "You weren't supposed to find me before Silas did. Welcome to today's story." If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. To understand why a mother hid beneath a mountain, the story had to begin with the son who stopped coming home. Graham Vale was 39 years old and one of the most respected preservation architects in the country. His work had restored historic libraries, museums, and landmark buildings across the United States. Newspapers occasionally interviewed him. Universities invited him to speak. His firm in Phoenix had more projects than he could personally manage. From the outside, it looked like success. But success had a way of hiding unfinished business. For 12 years, Graham had not spent more than a few days at a time in Black Laurel, West Virginia. He called his mother regularly. He sent money every month. And whenever guilt crept in during sleepless nights, he reminded himself that Nadine wasn't alone. Reverend Silas Crow was there. Silas was a distant relative and the most respected man in town. He led the local church, organized charity drives, visited elderly residents, and often reassured Graham that everything was under control. "Your mother is stubborn as ever," Silas would say with a chuckle. And Graham always believed him. Then, 3 weeks earlier, an old college friend from West Virginia had called unexpectedly. The question seemed innocent. "When was the last time you actually saw your mom?" The conversation haunted him, because the answer was embarrassing. Almost 3 years. That realization was what brought him home. The chartered plane landed shortly after noon at a small regional airport surrounded by hills and fading winter trees. Graham rented an SUV and drove toward Black Laurel. The town looked smaller than he remembered. Older too, storefronts stood empty. Paint peeled from buildings that once seemed permanent, yet what unsettled him most were the faces. Several people recognized him immediately. None of them looked happy to see him. An elderly man standing outside a diner glanced at him and quietly shook his head. A woman loading groceries into her car stared for several seconds before looking away. By the time Graham reached the old family property, a knot had formed in his stomach. The house wasn't empty. A pickup truck sat in the driveway. New curtains hung in the windows. A middle-aged couple answered the door. When Graham explained who he was, both exchanged uncomfortable looks. "You didn't know?" the woman finally asked. "Know what? We've been renting this place for almost 4 years. The words hit him like a punch. "Renting it from who?" The couple hesitated. Reverend Crow handled the paperwork. Graham stared past them at the familiar hallway behind the door. His mother's furniture was gone. Her photographs were gone. Everything was gone. "And my mother?" he asked quietly. The woman lowered her eyes. "Nobody's seen her around here for a long time." For the next 2 hours, Graham drove through town searching for answers. Most people avoided the conversation. Others claimed they didn't know anything. Finally, near the old post office, he found someone willing to talk. Martha Grayson had retired from the postal service years earlier. She remembered everyone. And unlike the others, she didn't seem afraid. She invited Graham onto her porch and handed him a glass of iced tea. Then she said something that made his blood run cold. "Your mother's mail stopped coming to her house years ago." Graham frowned. "What do you mean? It was redirected." "To where?" Martha looked toward the mountains rising beyond town. "I was never told exactly. But I remember seeing survey maps, old property records. Something about Black Laurel Ridge." She disappeared inside and returned carrying a worn envelope. Inside was a faded copy of a land survey. One corner contained a handwritten note, a location, a marker number, and a ridgeline Graham hadn't visited since he was a teenager. An hour later, he was climbing through dense woods. The path barely existed. Branches clawed at his jacket. The afternoon sunlight struggled through the trees. Then he found it, a rusted metal survey marker half buried beneath leaves, exactly where the note said it would be. His pulse quickened. He followed the direction indicated on the map. The terrain became steeper, rockier, quieter, and then he saw the steel door. It stood embedded in limestone as if someone had hidden an entrance inside the mountain itself. For several seconds, Graham simply stared. Nothing about it made sense. Then he noticed faint footprints in the dirt. Recent footprints. Someone was living here. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the handle. The hinges groaned. Cool air rushed out from the darkness beyond. "Graham?" The voice came from somewhere inside. Older, weaker, but unmistakable, his mother's voice. He stepped forward and froze. Rows of vegetables stretched beneath reflected light. Shelves lined the stone walls. Water trickled somewhere in the distance, and standing in the center of it all was Nadine Vale, thin, gray-haired, older than he remembered, but very much alive. For one impossible moment, neither of them moved. Then her eyes filled with something that wasn't relief. It wasn't joy. It was fear. Slowly, she reached toward a stack of documents resting on a nearby table. Her shaking hand pulled a large court envelope from the pile, and when she held it out to him, Graham saw his own signature across the front, a signature he had never written. Graham stared at the signature until the lines blurred. The name was his. The shape of the G, the sharp angle in Vale, even the impatient slash at the end looked close enough to fool someone who wanted to be fooled. But Graham knew his own hand. He knew the way his wrist moved across paper. He knew the small breaks in pressure no copier could understand. This was not his signature. He looked up at his mother. Nadine had not moved closer. She stood beside the stone table with one hand resting on its edge, as if the cave itself was helping her stay upright. Her gray hair was tied back with a strip of cloth. Her sweater hung loose on her thin shoulders. But her eyes were clear, harder than he remembered. Tired, yes. Afraid, yes. But not confused, Mom, he said softly. I didn't sign this. Her face changed, but only slightly. Not relief, not belief. Something more painful than both. The look of someone who wanted to believe him, but had already paid too much for trusting the wrong person. You sent him money, she said. I sent it for you. You sent it through Silas. Graham looked down at the envelope again. The words across the top made his stomach tighten. Raleigh County Court. Petition for appointment of guardian and conservator. His mother's full legal name sat beneath it, Nadine Elaine Vale. Then several pages of typed accusations: cognitive decline, unsafe living conditions, refusal of medical supervision, financial vulnerability, family concern. Family concern. His name was listed as the concerned family member. The cave felt colder. Graham set the papers down slowly like they might cut him. I need to make some calls. No. Nadine's voice snapped through the chamber. Not from here, he looked at her. She reached for a small metal box on a shelf and took out an old flip phone, the kind he had not seen in years. No smartphone signal in the back chamber, sometimes near the door, sometimes not. That is part of why I stayed alive. The sentence landed heavily between them. Stayed alive. Not hid. Not escaped. Stayed alive, Graham swallowed. Who was coming after you? Nadine's mouth pressed into a thin line. People who smile in public. He wanted to ask more, but something in her posture stopped him. She had survived this long by choosing what to say and when to say it. Pushing her now would only make her retreat further into the stone. So he did the one thing he should have done years ago. He listened. Nadine told him enough to make his hands go cold. She said Silas had started helping after she slipped on the porch one winter and spent 2 nights in the hospital. Nothing major, she insisted. Bruised ribs, a bad scare. But Silas came by afterward with casseroles from church, then pharmacy pickups, then bank forms he said would help him pay bills when she was too tired to drive. At first it sounded kind. Then kindness became access. Her mail changed, her bank statements stopped arriving, her neighbors grew distant. At church, people spoke to her softly, too softly, the way they spoke to a person they had already decided was slipping away. Then came the whispers. Nadine was forgetting things. Nadine was seeing men in the woods. Nadine was sleeping in the old cave. Nadine needed help before she hurt herself. I told them I was fine, she said. That only made them look at me worse. Graham felt shame rise so fast he almost could not breathe. Why didn't you call me? Her eyes lifted to his. I did. The words were quiet, Worse than an accusation, I called the number you gave me in Phoenix. Twice. A woman from your office answered the first time and said you were traveling. The second time, nobody called back. Nadine looked away. Then Silas told me you said I was becoming difficult, that you loved me, but you could not keep stopping your life every time I got frightened. Graham closed his eyes. He had been traveling constantly then. Conferences, museum restorations, a library opening in Denver, a preservation award in Boston. He remembered one message from an unknown West Virginia number that had never been returned because his assistant had marked it as local spam. One missed call. A life could split open around one missed call. I never said that, he whispered. Nadine did not answer. After a few minutes, Graham gathered the court envelope, bank notices, and several letters tied with twine. Nadine watched every movement. You're not taking those out of here, she said. I need copies. You need proof. I know that. But those are mine. There it was, the boundary. Firm, clear. A mother who had been stripped of keys, mail, money, and reputation was not about to surrender the last evidence she controlled. Graham nodded. Then I'll photograph them here. With your permission. That surprised her. For the first time since he stepped inside the sealed cave, Nadine looked at him as if he might still be the man she had raised, not the stranger named in the court papers. She gave one small nod. He spent the next half-hour photographing every page under the weak light from his phone, bank notices, utility bills. A letter from a clinic confirming missed appointments Nadine said she had never scheduled. A handwritten note from Silas reminding her to trust family and faith over fear. Then a receipt for a care account Graham had never opened, bearing both his name and Reverend Silas Crow's mailing address. When Graham finally stepped back outside, dusk had begun pressing through the trees. The mountain air smelled of wet leaves and cold stone. He climbed far enough from the cave to get a signal and called his bank. The first representative gave him polite answers. The second transferred him. The third went silent for too long after Graham read the account number from the receipt. Mr. Vale, she said carefully, that account received recurring transfers under your name, but it was not opened by you directly. His grip tightened around the phone. Who opened it? I can't disclose full details without verification from our fraud department. Then connect me. There may be a delay. Graham looked back toward the hidden cave entrance. His mother was somewhere behind that steel door, waiting in the dark because powerful people had made daylight unsafe for her. I've already waited 12 years, he said. I'm done waiting. By the time he drove back into town, the last light had gone behind the ridge. Black Laurel looked even smaller at night. A few porch lamps, a gas station sign, the diner glowing beside the road. He parked near the old courthouse but found the doors locked. Across the street, a hardware store was still open. Graham stepped inside, hoping to buy a flashlight, extra batteries, and a portable charger for Nadine. The man behind the counter looked up. His name tag read Delaney Pike. The moment he recognized Graham, his face hardened. We're closed. Graham glanced at the sign on the door. Says you close at 8. Not tonight. Graham stood still. I just need supplies. Delaney rested both hands on the counter. Maybe you should ask Reverend Crow. He's the one handling things up on the ridge now. A slow chill moved through Graham. My mother owns that ridge. Delaney gave a short laugh. No humor in it for now. Neither man spoke for a second. Then Delaney leaned closer, lowering his voice. You came back too late, architect. Folks around here already know what kind of son you are. Graham left without buying anything. Outside, his phone buzzed. An email from his bank's fraud department had arrived. Attached was a scanned copy of the care account authorization form. Graham opened it under the yellow streetlight. His forged signature was there again. But this time, beneath it, in smaller print, was the name of the person who had verified the account in person. Reverend Silas Crow. Graham stood under the hardware store's yellow light for a long moment, staring at the name on the screen. Reverend Silas Crow. Not a rumor, not a suspicion. A document. A real account. Real transfers. Real paperwork. And Silas's name sat directly beneath the forged signature. The mountain air suddenly felt heavier. For the first time since arriving in Black Laurel, Graham stopped asking himself whether something was wrong. Something was wrong. The question now was how deep it went. He drove back toward Black Laurel Ridge in darkness. The road narrowed as it climbed. Tree branches scraped against the SUV. His headlights flashed across old stone walls and abandoned fence posts. When he reached the hidden entrance, the steel door was still closed. He knocked twice. A bolt slid back from inside. Nadine opened the door only enough to recognize him before letting him enter. "You came back. I said I would." She studied his face carefully. "Did you find anything?" Graham showed her the email. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she sat down heavily at the stone table. Not because she looked surprised, because she looked tired. "Part of me hoped I was wrong," she admitted. "You knew about this account?" "I knew money was moving somewhere. I just couldn't prove where." The cave seemed quieter than before. Now that the shock had faded, Graham noticed details he had missed earlier. Rows of vegetables stretched through the chamber. Not many, but enough. Lettuce, spinach, herbs growing in wooden boxes. A narrow channel carried water along the edge of the growing beds. Simple, practical. Nothing like the madness people in town had described. "You've been maintaining all this alone?" "For years." "How?" Nadine glanced toward the nearest bed. "The mountain helps." That answer sounded almost mystical until she stood and motioned for him to follow. She led him deeper into the chamber. The cave widened. The air remained cool but not cold. Above them, several carefully positioned reflective panels redirected daylight from somewhere near the entrance. Not enough to flood the space, just enough to keep things alive. Graham found himself staring. His entire career revolved around preserving historic structures, old libraries, forgotten buildings, architectural history. And yet this felt different. This wasn't preservation. This was survival. Who built all this? Nadine's expression softened for the first time. Lenora. Graham recognized the name. His great-aunt, the relative most people never talked about. She really built this? Most of it. Nadine walked slowly between the planting beds. People called her crazy, said she spent too much time underground, said she was wasting her life. She smiled faintly. Funny how people call something foolish right until they need it. Graham looked around again. The stone channels, the growing beds, the carefully angled panels. None of it felt random. Everything had purpose. "Why didn't you ever tell me about this place?" Nadine stopped walking. "Because you left," the answer was calm, not angry. That somehow hurt more. "You had your life. Your career, your cities, your awards." She touched a basil plant gently. "I didn't want this mountain becoming another obligation." Graham looked away. He wanted to argue, wanted to explain. But explanations felt cheap inside a cave where his mother had spent years hiding from people who claimed to care about her. The next morning he woke before sunrise. Or rather, after a few restless hours in the SUV parked near the ridge. Nadine refused to leave the cave. He refused to leave her alone, neither trusted the town anymore. When daylight arrived, Graham made coffee using supplies he bought from a gas station 20 miles away. He carried 2 cups down into the cave. Nadine accepted hers without comment. A small gesture, but it felt like progress. Later that morning, she showed him another section of the cave. A narrower passage opened into a second chamber, smaller, darker. Shelves lined the walls. Glass jars, seed packets, boxes of records, years of records. Lenora kept everything, Nadine said, apparently so. She believed people forget the truth faster than they forget lies. That sentence stayed with him, because it described Black Laurel perfectly. The town remembered the version of Nadine they had been told. The difficult old woman, the unstable recluse, the burden. Not the woman who kept a hidden farm alive beneath a mountain. Not the woman who survived after everyone stopped looking for her. Around noon, the sound of engines echoed from outside. Both froze. Nadine set down a seed catalog immediately. Fear appeared on her face before either of them spoke. Graham moved toward the entrance. 3 pickup trucks had stopped near the ridge. Several men climbed out. One of them was Delaney Pike. Another held a folded document. They didn't look lost. They looked prepared. Delaney spotted Graham first. "Well, there he is." The men approached. Graham stepped forward. "What do you want?" Delaney unfolded the paperwork dramatically. "This land belongs to the church trust now." "No, it doesn't. That's not what we've heard." The others exchanged glances. One man looked uncomfortable. Another looked eager for confrontation. Delaney pointed toward the hillside. "The woman hiding in there doesn't have authority anymore." Graham felt anger rising. "My mother owns this property, prove it." For a second, silence hung between them. Then Graham did something Delaney clearly didn't expect. He walked back into the SUV and retrieved the original deed from the family records he had collected the previous day. He held it up, recorded, registered, valid. Delaney's confidence flickered, only slightly, but Graham saw it. "You think paper can't be challenged," Delaney said. "I think you're bluffing, maybe." Delaney folded his document, then he smiled, a cold smile. "The church has lawyers too." The men eventually left, but not before Delaney delivered one final message. "Tell Nadine she's running out of places to hide." Hours later, the trucks were gone, the dust had settled, yet the threat remained. That evening, Nadine sat quietly at the stone table. She looked older than she had that morning. Exhaustion showed in every movement. "They used to laugh at Lenora," she said. "Now they want what she built." Graham nodded. "That usually happens." For several minutes neither spoke. Water dripped somewhere deeper inside the cave. The growing lights reflected softly against stone. Then Nadine stood. Without a word, she crossed to an old wooden cabinet near the back wall. The lock looked ancient. She opened it carefully. Inside sat a leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed. Lenora Vale's handwriting covered the front. Nadine held it gently. She left this behind. Graham immediately understood its importance. Research? More than that. Then why hasn't anyone seen it? Nadine's eyes darkened. Because part of it is missing. The cave suddenly felt colder again. Graham frowned. "What do you mean?" Nadine opened the journal. The entries ran continuously for years, then abruptly stopped. Several pages had been torn out, cleanly, deliberately, not damaged, removed. She looked directly at him. "Those missing pages are the reasons Silas wants this land." And somewhere near the back of the journal, tucked between two surviving entries, Graham noticed something else. A folded letter, addressed to someone whose last name was Crow. Graham carefully unfolded the letter. The paper was brittle with age. The edges had darkened. For a moment he worried it might tear in his hands. Nadine watched him closely. "Lenora never mailed it," she said. "At least not that copy." The letter was addressed to a man named Walter Crow, not Silas, his father. Graham began reading. The first paragraph seemed ordinary. Notes about the ridge, water flow beneath the limestone, warnings about outsiders asking questions about mineral surveys. Then the tone changed. Lenora accused Walter Crow of attempting to gain access to private records connected to the property. She warned him that certain maps would never be sold. And near the bottom of the page, one sentence had been underlined twice. "If anything happens to me, the missing survey pages are not in the cave." Graham looked up immediately. "The survey pages?" Nadine nodded. "That's what disappeared from the journal, and Silas thinks they're still here, or he wants everyone else to think they are." The distinction mattered. For the first time, Graham began wondering whether the cave itself was only part of the story. If valuable records existed somewhere else, then Silas's obsession with the ridge might be hiding a larger objective. He spent most of the next morning photographing every page of the journal, not just the obvious sections, everything. Margins, sketches, dates. As an architect, he had spent years studying old documents. Sometimes the most important information lived in places people overlooked. Nadine watched him work. "You always did like old papers." He smiled faintly. Occupational hazard. The smile disappeared quickly. Neither of them had forgotten the distance between them. The missed calls, the years, the lies. Repairing trust was not as simple as discovering fraud. By noon, Graham drove into town. This time he had a plan. Instead of chasing rumors, he went directly to the county records office. The building sat behind the courthouse, small and worn but still functioning. A clerk named Rebecca Morton greeted him politely. Unlike most people in Black Laurel, she didn't seem interested in judging him. She simply asked what records he needed. Property records, trust filings, guardianship petitions, anything involving Nadine Vale. Rebecca disappeared into the archive room. She returned carrying several boxes. The search took nearly 3 hours. Most of it led nowhere. Then Graham found something strange. The guardianship petition filed against Nadine had listed multiple supporting statements. Several were unassigned. One came from an anonymous source. Another contained language nearly identical to wording found in church newsletters written by Silas. It wasn't proof, but it wasn't coincidence either. Then Graham found another detail. The petition described Nadine as living alone in unsafe conditions. Yet the filing date was nearly 8 months after she had already disappeared from public view. How could they know where she was living? Graham asked quietly. Rebecca looked at the document. They couldn't, not officially. Exactly, someone had either guessed, or someone knew more than they admitted. As Graham left the courthouse, a familiar voice called his name. Mr. Vale. He turned. Silas Crowe stood across the sidewalk. Perfect suit, perfect posture, perfect smile. Everything about him appeared calm, respectable, trustworthy. The kind of man people instinctively believed. May we talk? Silas asked. Graham considered walking away. Instead, he nodded. They crossed the street to a small public park. Neither sat down. Silas clasped his hands together. I understand you've found your mother. Not a question, a statement. Graham immediately noticed it. You seem surprisingly informed. Silas smiled. This is a small town. My mother doesn't use social media. No, she doesn't tell people where she lives. Silas's smile remained. People notice things. The answer felt rehearsed. Graham decided not to waste time. You verified a fraudulent account in my name. Silas's expression barely changed. That's a serious accusation. It's also true. Perhaps there has been some misunderstanding. There hasn't. For the first time, tension entered the conversation. Silas studied him carefully. Your mother is frightened, Graham. She's been frightened for years. She has reasons. Yes. Silas nodded slowly. She believes many things. The wording bothered Graham, not because of what it said, because of what it implied. Silas was already building the narrative. Confused elderly woman, concerned community, responsible church, everything neatly packaged. You told people she was mentally unstable. I told people she needed help. You filed papers. I tried to protect her. Graham stepped closer. And who was protecting her from you? For a brief moment something flashed in Silas's eyes, not guilt, not fear, annoyance. Then it vanished. The perfect smile returned. I'm sorry you feel that way. Graham almost laughed. It sounded exactly like something a lawyer would tell a witness before destroying them in court. Stay away from her, he said. Silas's expression finally hardened, only slightly, but enough. I don't think you understand the situation. Then explain it. Silas glanced toward the mountains. The ridge is becoming dangerous. Dangerous for who? Everyone involved. The answer raised more questions than it answered. Then Silas did something unexpected. He mentioned a specific medical appointment Nadine had supposedly missed years earlier. The date, the clinic, even the doctor. The problem was simple. Graham had photographed those clinic notices only the night before. No one except Nadine should have known he had seen them, unless someone had been reading her mail long before it reached her. Silas immediately realized what he had revealed. A tiny mistake, but a real one, and Graham saw it. The conversation ended shortly afterward. Silas walked away first, calm-trolled, but no longer untouchable. That evening, Graham sat inside the cave reviewing his notes. The pieces were beginning to connect. Not fully, not yet, but enough to reveal a pattern: money, mail, guardianship filings, property records, reputation. Everything pointed toward long-term control. Not a sudden opportunity, a plan, one that had taken years. Nadine entered carrying a small wooden box. I found something. Graham looked up. She set the box on the table. Inside were old bank statements, prescription receipts, utility records, the paper trail of an ordinary life. Then she handed him one folded document. This bothered me when I first found it. Graham opened it. It was a financial authorization form, one he had never seen before. His name appeared again. Another signature, another forgery. But that wasn't what made him freeze. Attached behind the form was a photocopy of an older legal record, a family record, partially redacted. Most of the names had been blacked out, except one. Graham stared at it, read it again, then a third time, because according to the document there had been a sealed adult adoption amendment filed years ago, and somehow, impossibly, it involved Nadine Vale and his own name. Graham read the document 3 times before looking up. The cave was silent except for the faint sound of water moving through the stone channels. What is this? He asked. Nadine remained standing beside the table. She looked as if she had been carrying the weight of that question for years. I was hoping you wouldn't find it yet. That isn't an answer. No, she said quietly. It isn't. The paper was incomplete. Most of the information had been blacked out, but enough remained visible to raise questions that would not disappear. An adult adoption amendment, a sealed filing, Nadine Vale's name, his own, and a county record number. Graham felt the ground shifting beneath him, not because he suddenly doubted who his mother was, Nothing could erase 39 years of memories. Nothing could erase every sacrifice she had made, but secrets changed the shape of trust, even when love remained. How long have you known about this? Nadine closed her eyes briefly. A long time, and you never told me. I tried. His laugh came out sharper than intended. No, you didn't. The words hung between them. For a moment, neither moved. Then Nadine pulled out a chair and slowly sat down. Years of exhaustion seemed to settle onto her shoulders. You think keeping that secret was easy? I think I deserved the truth. You deserved many things, she said. You deserved honesty. You deserved protection. You deserved better than what happened to this family. That answer only deepened his frustration because she still wasn't explaining. She was circling the truth, protecting it, the same way she had protected everything else. Graham pushed the document gently across the table. Tell me. Nadine stared at the paper. Not at him, at the paper, as if the ink itself could hurt. Your legal records were changed after your first mother died. The words landed softly, but they landed. Graham's chest tightened. He knew very little about the woman who gave birth to him, only fragments, a name, a few stories, nothing detailed. Whenever he asked questions over the years, Nadine would answer carefully and then change the subject. At the time, he thought she was protecting him from grief. Now he wasn't sure. What changed? The court records. Why? Nadine hesitated. Because there were people who wanted access to property they had no right to touch. Graham frowned. What does that have to do with me? More than you realize, that wasn't enough. And she knew it, but before Graham could press further, headlights flashed across the cave entrance. Both froze. A vehicle. Then another. Voices echoed faintly outside. Not many, but enough. Nadine stood immediately. Fear appeared in her eyes again. The same fear Graham had seen the day he arrived. They found us. He moved toward the entrance. No, yes, no. The word came out harder, more certain. He stepped outside. 2 vehicles sat near the ridge road. Neither belonged to Delaney Pike. Neither belonged to the church. One was a county utility truck. The other was a small sedan. An older woman stepped out first. Professional clothes, briefcase, gray hair, confident posture. She looked directly at Graham. Mr. Vale? Yes. My name is Marian Sutter. Graham immediately recognized the name. One of the few elder law attorneys still practicing in the county. He had seen her name attached to several guardianship disputes while researching records. What are you doing here? I received a call. From who? Marian looked past him toward the cave entrance. Your mother. Graham turned. Nadine had followed him outside. For the first time since his return, he saw something unexpected. Trust, not complete trust, but enough. Marian shook Nadine's hand. It's good to finally meet you, you too. Then Marian opened her briefcase. I didn't come empty-handed. Inside were copies of court records, financial filings, medical authorizations, guardianship notices. The stack was thick, far thicker than Graham expected. Marianne's expression darkened. I've been watching Reverend Crow for years. That got everyone's attention. Watching? Graham asked, professionally. She handed him a folder. 3 elderly clients came to me over the past decade claiming someone pressured them into signing financial documents connected to church programs. Silas, no direct proof, but his name keeps appearing nearby. Graham opened the folder. Several signatures looked questionable. Some accounts had been redirected. Property transfers, power of attorney forms, not identical situations, but similar patterns. Too similar. Marian pointed toward one document. Your mother's case stands out because she disappeared before the guardianship hearing could happen. Nadine's expression hardened. I didn't disappear. No, Marian agreed. You survived. For a moment, nobody spoke. The distinction mattered. Deeply, Marian continued. The problem is that the petition remains on record, not active, but not fully resolved either. Meaning someone could try again. Graham already knew who that someone would be. Silas. Marian studied him carefully. I assume you've already figured that out. He nodded. What do? We build evidence. Simple words. Complicated reality. The next 2 hours passed inside the cave. Marian reviewed documents, photographed records, compared signatures, asked careful questions. She never treated Nadine like a confused old woman, never interrupted her, never talked over her. The effect was immediate. Nadine sat straighter, spoke more confidently, remembered details more clearly. Graham noticed it. Respect changed people. Sometimes it restored parts of them that fear had buried. As evening approached, Marian organized everything into categories: mail redirection, bank activity, property records, medical authorizations, guardianship filings. The pattern was becoming harder to ignore. Then Marian stopped suddenly. She pulled one document from the pile. Read it again a third time. Her expression changed. That's odd. Graham looked over. What? Marian slid the page toward him. An archived family filing, old, partially sealed, connected to the adoption amendment. What am I looking at? I don't know yet. That's encouraging. Marian ignored the joke. She pointed to one line near the bottom, a legal notation, tiny, easy to miss. But once Graham saw it, he couldn't stop looking. The filing referenced another related record, one stored separately, one not connected to adoption law, hospital documentation, identity verification, and family succession records, all linked together under the same sealed case number. Nadine's face went pale, not frightened, recognizing, which frightened Graham even more. You've seen that before, he said. She didn't answer immediately. Marian looked between them. Mrs. Vale? Finally, Nadine nodded, very slowly. Yes. Graham felt his pulse quicken. What is it? Nadine looked directly at him, her eyes filled with something he hadn't seen since returning. Not fear, not guilt, grief, raw and old. The kind that never truly leaves. When she finally spoke, her voice barely rose above a whisper. It's the file that proves your life began with a lie. And before Graham could ask another question, Marian quietly added something even worse. The archive record shows another living person is attached to the same case. The cave fell silent. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Graham looked from Marian to Nadine and back again. The words remained suspended in the air like something fragile and dangerous. Another living person, attached to the same sealed case. What does that mean? He finally asked. Marian closed the folder carefully. It means the adoption amendment wasn't the only legal action connected to that case number. Who is the other person? I don't know yet. That file exists somewhere. Yes, then let's get it. Marian sighed. It isn't that simple. Some records are sealed under multiple departments. Family court, hospital archives, probate filings. If we're lucky, we can petition for access. If we're not, we'll need another legal basis. Graham hated the answer because he knew she was right. Real investigations moved slowly. Real records didn't simply appear because someone demanded them. But patience felt impossible. Not now. Not after learning that almost everything he believed about his family might be incomplete. Nadine stared at the table, her hands rested quietly in her lap. Yet Graham noticed something. She wasn't shocked, she was frightened, which meant she already knew more than she was saying. Mom, she looked up. Who is the other person? Pain flickered across her face. Someone who never asked for any of this. That isn't an answer. No, she admitted, it isn't. The conversation ended there, not because Graham wanted it to. Because Marian interrupted. We have a bigger problem. She spread several documents across the table, bank records, property filings, copies of the guardianship petition. Every piece pointed in the same direction. Silas was moving faster. The timing bothered her. He knows you're investigating, she said. He knows I found Nadine. He may know more than that. Graham immediately understood. If Silas believed old records were being uncovered, he wouldn't wait. He would act. That realization settled heavily over the room. By morning, clouds had gathered above Black Laurel Ridge. The air felt strange, heavy, the kind of weather mountain people notice before storms arrived. Nadine spent the morning checking the cave's growing beds. Marian returned to town to begin filing requests for additional records, and Graham drove toward Charleston. He needed answers, specifically, hospital records. The old case number from the adoption amendment had originated there. At least part of it had. 3 hours later, he sat inside a records office connected to a hospital system that had absorbed several smaller facilities decades earlier. The clerk helping him was patient but firm. Without proper authorization, access remained limited. Still, Graham obtained something useful, a reference index. Not the file itself, but proof that the file existed, and more importantly, proof that it remained active. Someone had requested access within the last 2 years. He stared at the notation, recent activity. That changed everything, because old secrets usually stayed buried unless someone had a reason to dig them up. Can you tell me who requested it? He asked. The clerk shook her head. No. Attorney? No. Family member? I can't disclose that. The answer frustrated him, but it confirmed enough. Someone else was searching, someone connected to the same mystery. As he drove back toward Black Laurel, rain began falling, first lightly, then harder. The mountains disappeared behind curtains of gray, water rushed through roadside ditches, thunder rolled across the ridges. By the time Graham reached the property, the storm had become serious. He found Nadine standing near the cave entrance, looking upward. "What is it?" she pointed. At first Graham saw nothing unusual. Then he noticed a narrow trench cut into the hillside above the cave. Fresh soil, fresh damage. His stomach tightened. That wasn't here. No, when did it happen? Recently. Rainwater had already begun pouring through the channel, directly toward the limestone above the entrance. A bad feeling settled over him. The trench looked deliberate, not natural, not erosion. A cut. Someone had redirected runoff, and someone knew exactly where the cave sat beneath the mountain. Thunder cracked overhead. The rain intensified. Within minutes, water streamed down the slope. Small rocks began tumbling. Then larger ones. Nadine, she didn't move inside. The first collapse happened seconds later, not massive but enough. Stone broke free above the entrance. A section of earth slid downward. The impact echoed through the ridge. Both of them ran. The steel door slammed shut behind them. Inside, the cave shook. Dust drifted from the ceiling. One of the growing shelves crashed onto the floor. Nadine grabbed the nearest table for balance. Graham's heart pounded. For nearly a minute, neither spoke. The mountain groaned around them. Then silence returned, a terrible silence, the kind that made people imagine worst-case scenarios. Graham rushed toward the entrance. The steel door wouldn't budge. His pulse spiked again. Nothing. Rock, mud, debris. The entrance had been partially buried. Damn it. Nadine remained surprisingly calm. Too calm, as if she had expected this. "You knew this could happen." She nodded slowly. "I worried it would. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because worrying isn't proof." But now they had proof, or something close to it. Hours passed. The storm continued outside. Water began entering parts of the cave that normally remained dry. Several growing beds flooded. One section of lettuce collapsed under muddy runoff. Years of work disappearing in a single afternoon. Graham refused to sit still. Using tools stored inside the cave, he worked at the blocked entrance, again and again and again. At one point, a falling stone struck his hand. Pain shot through his wrist. Blood appeared. He barely noticed. By dusk, a narrow gap finally opened. Enough air, enough space, enough hope. When Graham emerged into the rain, he immediately saw what convinced him this wasn't an accident. The trench, fresh shovel marks remained visible despite the storm. Someone had cut it recently. Someone wanted water redirected toward the cave. Someone wanted damage. By the time he returned inside, soaked and exhausted, his injured hand had swollen. Nadine wrapped it carefully. Neither spoke for several minutes. Then she said something that stayed with him. Silas always preferred other people to do his dirty work. Graham looked up sharply. "You think he did this?" "I think men like Silas never hold the shovel." That night neither slept much. The storm eventually weakened, but the damage remained. Flooded crops, blocked access, evidence of sabotage, and now a new danger. If word spread, Silas would use the collapse. He would claim the cave was unsafe, that Nadine couldn't care for herself, that intervention was necessary. The strategy was becoming visible. Destroy stability, then point at the damage. Just before dawn, Graham's phone vibrated, a message from Marian. Only 3 sentences. "I found the second name attached to the sealed case. She's alive, and she lives in Charleston." Attached below was a single image from an archive database, a woman's name, Elise Rowan, age 43, and beside it one chilling note. "Biological relationship requires verification through DNA testing." Graham read Marian's message twice, then a third time. The storm had passed, but the damage remained. Mud covered part of the cave entrance. Several growing beds were ruined. Water still dripped from cracks in the limestone ceiling. Yet none of that felt as urgent as the name on the screen, Elise Rowan. 43 years old, living in Charleston, connected to the same sealed case, connected to him. Nadine sat quietly at the table while Graham stared at the message. She already knew what he was thinking. "You should meet her." The words surprised him. "You know who she is." It wasn't a question. Nadine looked down at her hands. "I know enough." "Then tell me." Silence. The kind that had become familiar since his return. Not hostile silence, protective silence. Nadine had spent years carrying secrets she believed were keeping people safe. Now those same secrets were standing between them. She deserves to tell her own story, Nadine said finally. Graham exhaled sharply. Everyone keeps saying that, because it's true. Part of him wanted to push harder, another part knew it wouldn't help. Whatever connection existed between him and Elise, forcing answers out of Nadine would only deepen the wound already forming between them. Instead, he made a decision. By mid-morning, he was driving toward Charleston. The mountain roads slowly gave way to highways. The closer he got to the city, the stranger everything felt. He had spent years restoring historic buildings, solving structural problems, finding hidden damage behind walls. That work suddenly felt personal, because now he was doing the same thing with his own family. The address Marion provided led to a modest brick office building near downtown. Nothing remarkable. No sign suggesting wealth or influence, just a clean building with a small brass plaque near the entrance. Rowan Family Counseling Streifus. Graham stopped, read it again, then walked inside. The receptionist listened politely. Yes, Elise Rowan is here. Do you have an appointment? No. May I ask what this concerns? No. The woman hesitated, then smiled professionally. One moment. Several minutes later, a door opened at the end of the hallway. A woman stepped out, dark hair streaked with gray, sharp eyes, confident posture. She looked directly at Graham, and immediately stopped walking. The reaction lasted less than a second, but it happened. Recognition, not of him, of something. Elise recovered quickly. Mr. Vale, you know who I am. I know why you're here. Her voice carried neither warmth nor hostility, only caution, the kind developed by someone who had spent years protecting herself. She led him into her office. The door closed, neither sat immediately. Both studied each other, searching, comparing, measuring. Finally Elise spoke. Did Marion tell you everything? No. Good, that answer caught him off guard. She gestured towards two chairs. They sat. For a few moments neither seemed eager to begin. Then Elise opened a drawer, removed a folder, and placed it on the desk between them. I've been waiting for this conversation for almost 15 years. Graham stared at the folder. What are records, hospital records, archive requests, private investigations, correspondence, the accumulation of years. Not obsession, persistence. Elise opened the file. Several pages carried official seals. Others looked older. Some were copies, some originals. I started searching after my mother did, she said. She left questions. What kind of questions? The dangerous kind. Graham didn't interrupt. Elise continued. My mother spent years trying to locate someone connected to an old family dispute involving Black Laurel Ridge. The mention of the ridge immediately tightened his attention.
Lenora?
Elise nodded. Lenora Vale. The name seemed familiar to her. Personal, not historical. Did you know her? No. But my mother did. Another piece moved, not enough to reveal the picture, enough to change its shape. Elise slid one document across the desk, an old correspondence log. Several names had been redacted. Others remained visible. One of them was Lenora Vale, another was Walter Crowe, and a third made Graham freeze. Nadine Vale. The three names appeared repeatedly across multiple years, exchanging letters, meeting attorneys, discussing property disputes, something much larger than he had imagined. This wasn't just about land, Elise said quietly. No. Graham looked up. What was it about? Elise hesitated. The first sign of uncertainty he had seen from her. Identity. The word settled heavily between them. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Graham asked the question that had been waiting since the cave. Are we related? Elise looked directly into his eyes. Yes. No hesitation. Uncertainty. Just siblings. Half, I believe so. Believe not, no, not yet. Because belief required proof, and proof required time. Exactly the kind of distinction that made the situation feel real. Not dramatic, real. Have you done DNA testing? Not yet. Why? A sad smile appeared. Because once you know, you can't unknow. The answer stayed with him. By late afternoon they had exchanged more information than either expected. Not answers. Fragments. Pieces. Elise knew about sealed records. About Lenora. About disputed family documents. About someone actively accessing archived files in recent years. But she didn't know who, neither did Graham. Then, just as he prepared to leave, Elise opened a second folder. This one looked different, older, protected inside a plastic sleeve. There is one more thing. She removed a photograph. Not a picture of children, not a family portrait. 3 adults standing beside a survey marker near Black Laurel Ridge. The photograph was decades old. Lenora Vale stood on the left. Walter Crowe stood on the right, and between them stood a woman Graham recognized instantly, Nadine, much younger, but, unquestionably Nadine. His pulse quickened. "What am I looking at?" Elise's expression darkened. "The reason Silas wants the missing journal pages." Graham stared at the photograph, then noticed something unusual. Lenora wasn't looking at the camera, neither was Nadine. Both women were staring at a folded document in Walter Crowe's hand, a document whose title remained barely visible despite the faded image, Property Succession Agreement. And written across the bottom corner, in Lenora's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 words. "Not for the Crows." Elise slowly slid another paper toward him. A recent archive request, filed less than 6 months earlier. The requester name had finally been released through a legal inquiry. Graham looked at it, read it once, then again, because the person digging through the same sealed records wasn't Silas. It wasn't Walter Crowe's estate, and it wasn't Elise. The requester was Nadine Vale. The first official notice arrived 3 weeks later. Silas Crowe was no longer speaking from a church pulpit. He was speaking through attorneys, investigators, financial auditors. The deeper they looked, the more they found: years of redirected funds, unauthorized account access, forged signatures, trust accounts that had moved money through layers of paperwork designed to appear charitable. The guardianship petition became only one piece of a much larger pattern. The mining company withdrew completely. No one wanted to touch the deal anymore. Not once questions about fraud and elder exploitation became public. Delaney Pike cooperated quickly, too quickly. Faced with records and sworn statements, he admitted Silas had paid him to damage the ridge drainage and pressure local businesses into refusing service to Nadine. The town that had once treated Silas like a respected protector suddenly grew very quiet. People stopped defending him. They started defending themselves. Graham watched it happen from a distance. What surprised him most was not the investigation. It was Nadine. For years she had lived beneath a mountain, because other people controlled the story being told about her. Now she refused to let anyone tell it for her. When investigators interviewed her, she answered every question carefully. When reporters called, she declined. When neighbors suddenly appeared with apologies and casseroles, she thanked them politely, but did not pretend the past had never happened. She owed no performance of forgiveness, not to anyone. One cold afternoon, Graham and Elise sat with her outside the cave entrance. The damaged hillside had already begun to recover. Workers hired through Graham's firm were stabilizing the slope under supervision from engineers and environmental specialists. Nothing extravagant, nothing designed to turn the place into a tourist attraction. That had been Graham's choice. For the first time in years, he wasn't trying to solve a problem with money. He was trying to solve it with patience. Elise watched the crews working below. "You could have sold all of this years ago." Nadine smiled faintly. "Yes, and been comfortable, probably. Why didn't you?" Nadine looked toward the ridge, toward the limestone hidden beneath the trees, toward the cave that had carried her through years nobody else understood. "Because some things stop belonging only to you." Neither Graham nor Elise answered. They understood. The land had become more than property. It had become evidence, memory, proof, not just of Lenora's work, of Nadine's survival. A week later, the final DNA results arrived. Not dramatic, not shocking, just confirmation. Elise and Graham were adult half-siblings. The records supported it. The DNA supported it. The truth had simply taken decades to catch up. When Graham read the report, he felt less triumph than relief. For months he had been searching for certainty. Now he had it, and strangely, certainty mattered less than the relationship growing beside it. He and Elise weren't suddenly family because of a laboratory report. They were becoming family because they kept showing up. The hardest conversation came shortly afterward. It happened inside the cave. Among the restored growing beds, the winter greens had started returning, small patches of life pushing through dark soil. Graham stood beside Nadine. For a long time neither spoke. Finally she broke the silence. "You deserve the whole truth." He waited. "I hid down here to protect the land." He nodded. That part he already knew. But she wasn't finished. "I also hid because I was ashamed." The words landed harder than he expected. Nadine looked away. "I kept thinking if you came home and saw what had happened to me," her voice weakened, "you would see a frightened old woman who lost everything." Graham immediately shook his head. No, but that's how I saw myself. That was the wound, not the cave, not the land, not even Silas' shame, years of it. Years of believing she had become someone unrecognizable, someone her son would pity, someone who had failed. Graham felt his throat tighten. I should have come home. Nadine looked at him. I sent money, I know, I called, I know, but I wasn't here. For the first time, he stopped defending himself, stopped explaining, stopped listing reasons. He simply accepted it. The distance, the absence, the years that could never be recovered. Nadine studied him quietly. Then she nodded. Not forgiveness, not yet. Something more honest, recognition, a beginning. Months passed. Winter settled across Black Laurel Ridge. The legal threats faded, the investigations continued. Silas faced consequences that would take years to fully unfold. Court hearings, financial reviews, loss of reputation, loss of control. No dramatic downfall, just the steady collapse of a life built on manipulation. Meanwhile, something else grew. The Lenora Vale Underground Agriculture Trust officially opened before the first heavy snowfall. Its mission was simple: protect the cave, preserve Lenora's journals, support agricultural education, nothing more, nothing less. Nadine insisted on one condition: the trust would never belong to Graham, or Elise, or anyone else. It would serve the land itself. Graham agreed immediately. By December, a small cottage stood near the ridge. Simple, warm, practical. Nadine chose every detail herself. She moved into it willingly, not because someone rescued her, because she wanted to. The cave remained open, the garden remained active, and for the first time in years she could walk between both worlds without fear. On the first day of winter planting season, Graham arrived before sunrise. He found Nadine already inside the main chamber. Fresh greens filled the restored beds. Water moved quietly through stone channels. Light reflected softly from mirrors mounted high above. The cave felt alive again, not hidden, alive. Near the entrance stood a glass display case. Inside rested Lenora Vale's journal, the original volume. Protected at last, Nadine carefully adjusted its position, then stepped back. For a moment she simply looked at it. The journal, the greens, the limestone walls, the years, everything that had survived, everything that almost hadn't. Graham stood beside her. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Some truths arrived as words, others arrived as presence. Outside, snow began falling across Black Laurel Ridge. Inside, the garden continued growing, just as it always had, quietly, patiently, in the dark. If this story made you think of someone who waited too long to be seen, for more Family Echoes stories where the truth comes home, even when it has to climb out of the dark.